Welcome back to Bar Girl Baddies. Today's story isn't about a young guy chasing bar girls or getting scammed in love. It's about something bigger, quieter, and happening right now across Thailand. Thousands of Western retirees are packing up and leaving, not because they want to, because they have to. This is Derek's story, a 58-year-old former logistics manager from Winnipeg who spent 7 years building what he thought was his forever life in Chiang Mai. Until the math stopped adding up. Until the dream became a slow-motion financial nightmare. He sent us his story because he wants others to know what the YouTube retirement gurus don't tell you. What happens when the paradise you planned for changes its prices while your pension stays frozen? Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you're retired abroad or thinking about it, we want to hear your story. Have you seen costs rise? Are you feeling the squeeze? And if this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Because these stories matter. Real people, real consequences, real lessons. Now here's Derek, in his own words. My name is Derek Morrison, and I'm writing this from a one-bedroom apartment in Scarborough, Ontario, not where I thought I'd be at 58. 3 months ago, I was in Chiang Mai, Thailand, living what I genuinely believed was my retirement dream. Now I'm back in Canada, sleeping on a mattress I bought off Facebook Marketplace, looking for part-time work to supplement a pension that doesn't stretch nearly as far here as I thought it would there. I need to tell you how this happened because I see the same patterns now that I fell for then. I see the YouTube videos with titles like, "Retire like a king in Thailand on $1,500 a month," and I want to scream at the screen. I see the Facebook groups full of guys my age, divorced or widowed or just tired, posting photos of beaches and cheap beer and talking about their cost of living spreadsheets. I was that guy. I made those spreadsheets. I ran those numbers 100 times. The numbers lied. Or maybe I just didn't account for the fact that numbers change. Let me take you back to 2018. I was 51, recently divorced after 23 years of marriage, working for a logistics company in Winnipeg, doing the same routes, the same problems, the same soul-crushing routine I'd been doing for 2 decades. My ex-wife got the house. I got a pension that would start paying out 2,800 Canadian dollars a month when I turned 55, and a basement apartment that cost me 1,400 a month in rent alone. Do the math on that. 1,400 for rent in a place where I could hear my upstairs neighbour's every footstep, where the winter cold seeped through the windows no matter how high I cranked the heat, where I'd sit on a Friday night scrolling through streaming services, trying to find something, anything, to make me feel less like I was just waiting to die. The divorce wasn't bitter. It was worse. It was indifferent. We'd stopped being people to each other years before and just kept going through the motions. When she finally said she wanted out, my main feeling was relief. But relief doesn't keep you warm in a Winnipeg winter. Relief doesn't fill the silence in a basement apartment when you realize you're 51 years old and you're not sure what the point of any of it was. My daughter Emily was 26, living in Toronto, building her own life. We talked maybe once a month. Polite conversations, surface-level stuff. I'd become the dad she felt obligated to check on, not someone she actually wanted to spend time with. That hurt more than the divorce, if I'm being honest. So there I was, 51, alone, cold, bored, looking at 4 more years until I could retire on a pension that would barely cover my rent and utilities in Canada. That's when the algorithm found me. YouTube started recommending videos. Retire in paradise. Living in Thailand on $1,000 a month. How I quit the rat race at 55. I'd watch them late at night. These guys sitting in outdoor restaurants with ocean views, talking about their cost of living, showing their condos, their motorbikes, their active social lives. They looked younger than their ages. Happier. Free. I started doing research. Real research. Not just the highlight reels, but the expat forums, the cost of living breakdowns, the visa requirements. The retirement visa needed 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account, which was about 32,000 Canadian dollars at the time, or proof of 65,000 baht monthly income, which was around 2,600 Canadian. My pension was 2,800. I could qualify. The cost of living estimates were incredible. A nice one-bedroom condo in Chiang Mai for 400 to 500 Canadian a month. Meals for $2 to $4. Excellent healthcare at a fraction of Western costs. Year-round sunshine. A social community of other expats. Respect for older foreigners instead of the invisible feeling I had in Canada. I started planning. Told myself I'd take a research trip first, not jump in blind. Booked 2 weeks in Chiang Mai in March 2018 because I'd read it was the best city for retirees. Not as seedy as Pattaya, not as expensive as Bangkok, perfect weather, mountains, culture, infrastructure. The moment I stepped out of that airport, I felt something shift. The warm air hit me like a blanket after years of cold. The smell was different. Alive, a mix of street food and tropical flowers and incense. The taxi driver smiled at me like I mattered, called me sir, helped with my bag. It cost me 200 baht to get to my hotel, about $8 Canadian. The same trip from Toronto airport to downtown would have been $70 minimum. That first week, I barely slept because I was too excited. I'd wake up early and walk through the old city, past temples with gold spires catching the sunrise, monks in orange robes collecting alms, street vendors setting up their carts. I'd get breakfast for 60 baht, fresh fruit and sticky rice and Thai coffee, sitting on a plastic stall watching the city wake up, and I'd think this cost less than a coffee back home. I rented a motorbike for 3,000 baht for the week, about $120. Freedom on 2 wheels. I drove up to Doi Suthep Temple, wound through mountain roads, stopped at viewpoints overlooking the city. I went to the Sunday walking street market and bought shirts for 100 baht each, ate from food stalls, listened to live music, felt part of something. But the real revelation was meeting other expats. I'd go to cafes in the Niman area and strike up conversations. Guys from Australia, Canada, the UK, the US, all retired or semi-retired, all living on pensions or savings that went 3 or 4 times further here than back home. They weren't rich. They were guys like me, middle-class workers who'd discovered a loophole in geography and currency. A Canadian guy named Phil from Vancouver became my informal tour guide. He was 62, been living in Chiang Mai for 5 years, surviving comfortably on his Canada pension plan and old age security, about the same as my pension would be. He showed me his condo, a modern 1-bedroom in a good building for 12,000 baht a month, about 480 Canadian. He showed me his monthly budget breakdown. Everything tracked. Everything made sense. Phil took me to his regular spots. The gym, where he paid 5,000 baht for 3 months, less than 200 Canadian dollars. The hospital, where he got his annual checkup for 6,000 baht with full blood work and consultation. The restaurant where he played poker every Tuesday night with other expats, drinking beer that costs 30 baht a bottle while they tell stories and complain about visa runs and compare notes on the best exchange rates. I went to one of those poker nights, sat around a table with guys from 4 different countries, ages ranging from mid-50s to mid-70s, and they all said the same thing. Best decision they ever made, wished they'd done it sooner. Couldn't imagine going back. An Australian named Roger told me he'd been spending his winters in Thailand for 3 years and just made the move permanent. Sold everything back in Perth, got his retirement visa, never looked back. He said the hardest part was admitting to himself that the life he'd been told to want, the suburban house and the neighbourhood barbecues and the grandkids' visits, wasn't actually making him happy. Here he hiked, he dated, he learned Thai, he felt young again. That phrase stuck with me, felt young again. I went back to Winnipeg after those 2 weeks and my basement apartment felt even smaller, even colder, even more pointless. It was still winter, grey slush everywhere. I'd go to work and watch the clock, and come home and heat up frozen dinners and think about wontines and mountains and warm nights. I started planning for real. I had about 45,000 Canadian in savings from my share of the divorce settlement. I needed 32,000 to meet the retirement visa requirement. That left me 13,000 as a buffer, plus my pension would start in 4 years when I turned 55. But I didn't want to wait 4 years. I crunched numbers obsessively. If I could find work teaching English or doing some online consulting, just enough to cover my basics until my pension kicked in, I could make it work. I reached out to Phil and he connected me with a guy who did small business consulting for Thai companies wanting to expand internationally. Not legal work technically on a retirement visa, but low-key enough that people did it. The plan solidified. I'd move in early 2019, get my retirement visa sorted, live off savings for the first year while building some side income, then coast on my pension starting at 55. The numbers worked if Thailand stayed as cheap as it was in 2018. That's the sentence I should have examined more carefully. If Thailand stayed as cheap as it was? I told Emily over video call. She was skeptical. Asked all the logical questions. What about healthcare as I got older? What about if something went wrong? What about family? I brushed it off, told her I'd be fine, that I'd visit Canada every year, that this was about me finally living instead of just existing. She didn't argue much. I think part of her was relieved I'd be farther away, less of an obligation to check on. That hurt, but I understood it. I gave notice at work, sold my car, sold most of my furniture, packed my life into 2 suitcases. Said goodbye to exactly 3 people who mattered enough to tell in person. That was sobering, realizing how small my world had become. January 2019. I flew one way to Chiang Mai with $45,000 in my bank account, a pension 4 years away, and absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. Phil picked me up from the airport, helped me find a condo in Niman, a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a decent building with a pool and gym. 12,000 baht a month, 480 Canadian. I signed a year lease, paid first and last month. Bought a used motorbike for 25,000 baht from another expat who was upgrading. I set up my Thai bank account and transferred the 32,000 Canadian for my visa requirement. The exchange rate gave me about 820,000 baht. Buffer secured. I bought basic furniture from IKEA, kitchen supplies, got a local phone plan, figured out the bus routes and the good markets and which 7-Eleven had the nicest staff. Within a month, I had a routine. Morning coffee at a place called Ristorato, 60 baht for an excellent latte. Sitting outside watching the neighbourhood wake up. Then the gym or a walk. Thai language lessons twice a week. With a tutor, I paid 200 baht an hour. Lunch at street stalls. Dinner either cooking at home or meeting up with the expat crew. I kept a budget spreadsheet religiously. Rent was 12,000. Utilities about 2,000. Food, maybe 8,000 if I was being reasonable. Motorbike gas and maintenance, maybe 1,500. Phone and internet, 1,500. Health insurance. Through a local company, 2,300 a month. Entertainment and miscellaneous, maybe 5,000. Total monthly burn, about 46,000 baht, around 1,800 Canadian. My savings would last 2 years even without any income, and I'd started doing some consulting work, bringing in 15 to 20,000 baht a month, enough to cover my entertainment and extras. The math worked beautifully. I made friends beyond Phil and Roger. There was Tom, a Brit who'd retired from teaching and now volunteered at an elephant sanctuary. There was Mike and Linda, a couple from Alberta who ran a small guest house. There was Jared, a younger American guy doing digital marketing remotely and living like royalty on 4,000 US a month. We'd do visa runs together to Laos or Myanmar, turning bureaucracy into adventure. We'd take weekend trips to Pai or down to the islands. We'd have barbecues at someone's condo, potluck dinners, movie nights. I started dating casually. Nothing serious, but it felt good to be seen again. To have women smile at me in bars, to go on dates that didn't require a second mortgage. I learned enough Thai to have basic conversations, to show respect, to make the locals laugh at my terrible pronunciation. I video called Emily every couple weeks. Showed her around my condo, my neighbourhood, tried to convey how different I felt. She seemed happy for me, cautiously. Said I looked healthier, more relaxed. Asked when I'd visit. I said maybe next year, once I was fully settled. Years went by like that. 2019 slipped into 2020. Then the pandemic hit and everything froze. But I was already here, already set up, so I just hunkered down and waited it out. Saved money actually, because there was nowhere to go. When things opened back up in 2021 and 2022, it felt like the golden age continued. I celebrated my 55th birthday in March 2022 with my expat friends at a rooftop bar. My pension payments had started, 2,800 Canadian every month, converted to baht and deposited automatically. The exchange rate was giving me about 72,000 baht. Combined with my diminished but still decent savings and occasional consulting work, I felt secure. I told Phil that night, a little drunk on cheap cocktails with an incredible view of the city lights below, that I'd finally found where I belonged. He smiled and raised his glass. To reinvention, he said. That was the peak. That moment right there, March 2020, thinking I'd cracked the code, that I'd figured out how to live well on modest means in a beautiful place with good people. If only I'd known that the code was about to change its encryption. If only I'd understood that belonging is a feeling, not a financial guarantee. If only I'd run the numbers not just for now, but for what happens when now becomes later and the margins disappear. But I didn't. I just drank my cocktail and watched the lights and felt grateful and secure. That was the last time I felt that way. The thing about slow-motion disasters is you don't notice them happening until you're already halfway buried. There's no single moment where everything falls apart. It's more like 1,000 small paper cuts that you keep telling yourself don't matter until one day you look down and realize you're bleeding out. For me, that bleeding started in early 2023, about a year after my 55th birthday celebration on that rooftop. The golden years, as I'd started calling them in my head, were still going. I had my routines, my friends, my comfortable little life in Chiang Mai. The pension was flowing in every month like clockwork. I'd stopped doing consulting work because I didn't need it anymore. My savings had stabilized around 38,000 Canadian after dipping during the pandemic years. Everything seemed fine. The first cut was so small, I almost didn't feel it. My landlord, a Thai woman named Kuan Porn, who owned several units in my building, asked to meet with me in January 2023. My lease was coming up for renewal. I figured it would be the same routine as the previous renewals. Sign the papers, pay the deposit, done. She was apologetic, almost embarrassed. The building had changed management companies, new policies. Market rates had adjusted. My rent was going from 12,000 baht to 15,000 baht per month. I must have looked shocked because she immediately started explaining tourism was roaring back post-pandemic. Demand for units was high. Other buildings in Niman were charging 18 to 20,000 for comparable places. She was actually giving me a deal because I'd been a good tenant. 15,000 baht. That was still only about 600 Canadian at the exchange rate. Still way cheaper than anything back home. Still reasonable in the grand scheme. I signed the renewal. But that night I updated my budget spreadsheet and saw my monthly burn increase from 46,000 baht to 49,000. A difference of 3,000 baht, about 120 Canadian dollars. Not catastrophic, just uncomfortable. The second cut came from the street food vendors. My regular morning routine included stopping at a cart near my condo for khao man gai, the poached chicken and rice dish that had been my staple breakfast for years. The auntie who ran the cart knew my order by sight. 40 baht, every morning, same smile, same extra cucumber she'd throw in, because I always said thank you in Thai. One morning in February, the price had changed. 50 baht. I pointed at the sign, confused, thinking maybe I'd misread. She shook her head and explained in broken English that chicken prices had gone up. Rice had gone up. Everything more expensive now. She looked genuinely sorry about it. 50 baht was still less than 2 Canadian dollars. I paid and smiled and told her no problem. But I noticed the papaya salad lady had also raised her prices from 45 to 70 baht. The noodle shop I loved went from 55 to 85. The coffee at Ristrata crept from 60 to 80 baht. Individually, these increases were nothing. 20 baht here, 30 baht there. But I was eating out twice a day minimum, sometimes 3 times. Those small bumps added up to an extra 6 or 7,000 baht a month just on food. I started cooking at home more, bought groceries at Rimping supermarket and tried to recreate the dishes I loved. But grocery prices had jumped too. A chicken breast that used to cost 70 baht was now 110. The Thai holy basil I needed for pad krapao was suddenly 40 baht, a bunch instead of 20. By March 2023, my monthly food budget had gone from 8,000 baht to about 14,000. I told myself it was fine. Inflation happens everywhere. At least I wasn't dealing with Canadian prices where a single grocery trip could cost $150 for basic staples. The third cut was the exchange rate. I never paid much attention to currency fluctuation before. The Canadian dollar had hovered around 26 to 27 baht per CAD for years. My $2,800 pension reliably converted to 72 or 73,000 baht every month. But in April 2023, I noticed my deposit was only 69,000 baht. I checked the exchange rate. The Canadian dollar had weakened to about 24.7 baht per CAD. I did the math. That was a loss of about 6,000 baht compared to what I'd been getting before. 6,000 baht a month. 240 Canadian. Not a huge amount in isolation, but combined with the rent increase and the food inflation. I was suddenly burning through 58 to 60,000 baht per month instead of the 46 I'd planned for. My pension was depositing 69,000. That left me 9 to 11,000 baht of breathing room, about 360 to 440 Canadian dollars. My safety margin had been cut by more than half. I started paying attention to the expat forums more carefully. Reading the threads about cost of living increases. Guys were complaining everywhere. Pattaya, Bangkok, Chiang Mai, even the smaller cities. Everything was going up. Rent, food, utilities, visa agent fees, transportation. The responses were always the same. Stop complaining, still cheaper than the West, learn to adapt, shop local, cut the luxuries. I cut the luxuries, cancelled my gym membership and started doing bodyweight exercises in my condo. Stopped going to the nice coffee shop and made instant coffee at home. Cut back on the poker nights because even cheap beer adds up when you're drinking 5 or 6 bottles over a few hours. Stopped taking weekend trips to the islands. My social life contracted. I told myself it was temporary, just tightening the belt for a few months until things stabilised. Things didn't stabilise. In June 2023, my health insurance premium renewal notice arrived. The annual cost was jumping from 28,000 baht to 42,000 baht, a 50% increase in 1 year. I called the insurance company, furious. The customer service rep was patient and professional. She explained that I was now 56 years old. Higher risk category. Medical costs in Thailand had increased significantly. The policy was actually quite competitive compared to other insurers. I shopped around. She was right. Other companies either wanted similar rates or wouldn't insure someone my age at all without excluding pre-existing conditions. 42,000 baht per year, 3,500 per month. My insurance costs had gone from 2,300 to 3,500 baht monthly. Updated the spreadsheet. Monthly burn now at 61,000 baht minimum. The margin was shrinking to almost nothing. I started withdrawing from my savings to cover the gaps. Just 1,000 or 2,000 baht here and there when the pension deposit didn't quite stretch far enough. Told myself it was temporary. The exchange rate would bounce back. I'd find ways to economize further. My savings could handle a few months of this. But the exchange rate didn't bounce back. By September 2023, it had weakened further to around 24.2 baht per Canadian dollar. My pension was converting to about 67,000 baht. I was burning 61 to 63,000 per month, depending on unexpected expenses. That left me 4 to 6,000 baht of margin. 160 to 240 Canadian dollars. If anything went wrong, anything at all, I'd be dipping into savings. Things went wrong. My motorbike, the used Honda Wave I'd bought back in 2009, started having problems. The engine made a rattling sound. Took it to the shop. The mechanic showed me worn parts, explained in Thai English mix that it needed significant work. 8,000 baht for repairs. I paid it. Took the money from savings. My balance dropped from 38,000 Canadian to 36,000. Then my laptop died. Just wouldn't turn on one morning. I needed a laptop for staying in touch with Emily, managing my finances, entertainment, everything. Bought a decent used one from a shop in town. 15,000 baht. Another 600 Canadian from savings. Balance, 35,400. In October, my building announced they were replacing the hot water heaters in all units. Mandatory upgrade. Each tenant's share, 12,000 baht. I argued with the building management. Explained I hadn't asked for an upgrade. The old system worked fine. They showed me the ownership committee decision, not negotiable. Pay or face eviction for lease violation. I paid. Another 480 Canadian from savings. Balance, 34,920. I was hemorrhaging money and my income hadn't changed at all. That's the thing that kept me up at night. My pension was exactly the same amount it had always been. 2,800 Canadian dollars per month. Every month, no raises, no cost of living adjustment beyond the standard government increases that never matched real inflation. But Thailand was no longer the Thailand I'd moved to. I started noticing the changes everywhere once I was paying attention. The condo developments going up all over Niman. Luxury units starting at 5 million baht and up. The new coffee shops charging 150 baht for lattes, catering to digital nomads and wealthy tourists. The restaurants I used to love, either closing down or renovating and doubling their prices. The night markets were increasingly filled with Chinese tour groups and Korean influencers instead of locals. The prices reflected that shift. A pair of fisherman pants that used to cost 120 baht was now 300. The fruit shakes went from 35 baht to 70. Even the temples started charging foreigners entrance fees where they'd been free before. Chiang Mai was gentrifying in real time, and I was on the wrong side of that economic shift. My expat friend group was changing too. Phil moved back to Vancouver in August 2023. He didn't make a big announcement, just mentioned casually at a dinner that he was going back to be closer to his kids and grandkids. Said it was always the plan, eventually. But I saw his budget spreadsheet once, and I knew the real reason. He was in the same squeeze I was. Roger, the Australian, started spending more time in Laos and Vietnam, where costs were lower. He'd only come back to Chiang Mai for visa renewals and to see old friends. Said the vibe had changed. Wasn't the same place anymore. Tom stopped showing up to gatherings. I texted him a few times and got short responses. Finally asked directly if everything was okay. He admitted his savings had run out faster than expected, and he'd taken a job teaching English online to cover expenses, which meant he was working 12-hour days to make enough to stay afloat. The retirement dream had become just another job. Except now he was doing it in Thailand instead of back home. Mike and Linda sold their guest house at a significant loss. They'd been struggling since the pandemic, couldn't get the occupancy rates back up, couldn't compete with the Airbnb investors buying up properties. They moved to Portugal, where apparently the retirement visa program was easier and the cost of living more stable. The Tuesday night poker games stopped happening. Not because anyone declared them over, just because week after week someone would cancel, and eventually we stopped trying to organise them. I went from having a solid social circle to being increasingly isolated. The new expats arriving were different. Younger digital nomads making tech salaries, treating Chiang Mai like a temporary playground. Wealthier retirees with investment portfolios and passive income who weren't worried about a 10 baht increase in street food prices. I didn't fit with either group. By December 2023, I was eating most meals at home, barely going out, spending my evenings in my condo watching pirated streaming sites and video calling Emily once a week. She'd ask how I was doing, and I'd lie and say everything was great. Show her the view from my balcony. Talk about the weather. Avoid mentioning that I was basically living like a hermit, trying to stretch every baht. The holidays were depressing. Christmas Day, I ate fried rice from 7-Eleven and watched other expats posting photos on Facebook of their beach vacations and restaurant celebrations. I couldn't afford either. New Year's Eve. I stayed in my condo and went to bed at 10 because the fireworks outside just reminded me of everything I was losing. January 2024. My landlord gave me notice that when my lease came up for renewal in 6 months, the rent would increase to 22,000 baht. The building had been sold to a new ownership group. They were renovating units and repositioning as premium accommodation. My unit would go to 22,000, or I could choose not to renew. 22,000 baht. Almost 900 Canadian dollars. In a city where I'd moved specifically because rent was cheap. I started looking at other options. Everything comparable was 18 to 20,000 minimum now. The cheaper places were in areas far from the centre, older buildings, no amenities. I could save maybe 3,000 or 4,000 baht monthly, but I'd lose the location, the pool, the sense of still living the life I'd imagined. I ran the numbers obsessively. If I moved to a cheaper place for 16,000 baht, kept my food budget lean at 12,000, utilities at 2,000, insurance at 3,500, phone and internet at 1,500, motorbike costs of 1,500. That was 39,000 baht monthly. My pension was converting to between 66 and 68,000 baht, depending on exchange rate fluctuations. That left me 27 to 29,000 baht of margin. 1,000 to 1,200 Canadian. Enough to survive, but with zero room for anything unexpected. No travel, no social life, no safety net for emergencies. And I'd be spending my savings buffer just to cover the months when expenses ran higher or the exchange rate dipped. I looked at my bank balance, 34,000 Canadian in savings, down from 45,000 when I'd arrived 5 years earlier. If I kept bleeding at the current rate, I had maybe 3 to 4 years before I was completely broke. 3 to 4 years. I'd be 60 or 61, too young for increased pension benefits, too old to easily find work, in a foreign country with no family and no social safety net beyond what I could pay for. The realization hit me one night in February 2024, while I was lying in bed unable to sleep, doing mental math for the 100th time. I'd built my entire plan on 2018 prices and 2018 exchange rates. I'd assumed those variables would stay relatively constant. They hadn't. And there was no reason to think they'd improve. Thailand's economy was growing. The baht was strengthening against Western currencies. Tourism was booming again, which meant prices in expat areas would keep rising. The government was tightening visa requirements and enforcement. Everything was trending in the wrong direction for modest income retirees. I wasn't failing at retirement. The economics were failing me. But knowing that didn't change the math. It didn't make my pension any bigger, or my savings any deeper, or the costs any lower. I started having stress dreams, waking up at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding, thinking about visa renewals and medical emergencies, and what happens when the money actually runs out. I'd lie there in the dark, listening to the sounds of my building, the traffic outside, wondering how long I could sustain this. During the day, I'd put on the mask, go about my routines, smile at the street vendors, make small talk with the few remaining expat friends, pretend everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. I was 61,000 baht away from disaster every single month, and the gap between my income and my necessary expenses was narrowing like walls in a trash compactor, slow but relentless. The dream I'd chased for 7 years, the life I'd sold everything to build, was becoming a trap. And I had no idea how to escape it without admitting I'd failed. So I just kept going, kept trying to make it work, kept telling myself next month would be better, the exchange rate would improve, I'd find a way. I kept lying to myself right up until the moment I couldn't anymore. The end didn't come all at once. It came in stages, each one forcing me closer to a decision I didn't want to make. My lease renewal came up in June 2024. I'd been dreading it for months. Ever since my landlord told me about the 22,000 baht increase, I'd looked at cheaper places, toured buildings in less desirable areas, done the calculations over and over, hoping the math would somehow work out differently. It never did. I moved to a smaller condo in the Santitam area, farther from Liman, in an older building that smelled faintly of mildew and had unreliable Wi-Fi. 16,000 baht per month. The place was maybe 60% the size of my old unit. No pool, no gym, no view. Just 4 walls and a bathroom with water pressure that fluctuated wildly. The first night there, I sat on the floor because my furniture hadn't arrived yet, and I just stared at the peeling paint on the ceiling and thought about how far I'd fallen from that rooftop celebration 2 years earlier. But I'd saved 6,000 baht a month in rent. That was something. That was survival. Except moving had cost me. Security deposit, moving truck, buying new items because some old furniture didn't fit. 25,000 baht total. Another 1,000 Canadian from my shrinking savings. Balance, 33,800 Canadian. July 2024. I got food poisoning from a street vendor. Spent 3 days violently ill, barely able to keep water down. On the 4th day, I was so dehydrated and weak I took a taxi to the hospital. They put me on an IV, ran tests, kept me overnight for observation. The bill came to 47,000 baht after my insurance covered their portion. My insurance, as I discovered reading the fine print in the hospital business office while hooked up to an IV, didn't cover foodborne illness to the extent I thought it did. Something about personal negligence and street food being high risk. I paid the bill and watched my savings drop another 1,900 Canadian. Balance, 31,900. When I got back to my condo, I was too weak to climb the 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. A neighbour, a young Thai woman, had to help me up. She probably thought I was dying. I felt like I was. I spent a week recovering, eating nothing but plain rice, and trying not to think about how a simple case of food poisoning had just cost me a month and a half of my safety margin. August brought the kind of heat that made my non-air-conditioned bedroom unbearable. I'd been trying to save money on electricity by only running the AC in the evenings, but I broke down and started running it most of the day. My electric bill jumped from 1,800 baht to 4,200 baht. Every single month it was something. The motorbike needed new tyres. 3,500 baht. My phone died and needed replacing. 6,000 baht for a basic model. The building raised the common area fees. 500 baht monthly increase. Death by 1,000 cuts. That phrase kept running through my head. By September 2024, my savings were down to 28,000 Canadian. I'd burned through 17,000 in just over 5 years. At the current rate, I had maybe 2.5 years left before I hit zero. 2.5 years before I'd be 61 years old, broke, in a foreign country, with no plan B. That's when my visa renewal came up. I'd been dreading this too. The immigration rules had gotten stricter over the past year. I'd seen posts in the Expat forums about people getting rejected for minor paperwork issues, about immigration officers demanding more documentation, about the crackdown on people skirting the financial requirements. The retirement visa required proof of either 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account for at least 3 months before renewal, or evidence of 65,000 baht monthly income. My pension converted to somewhere between 66 and 68,000 baht, depending on when the exchange rate was checked. Close, but not always clearly above the threshold. Some months I'd get a good rate and be fine. Other months I'd be borderline. I decided to play it safe and use the bank account method. Transferred money from my Canadian savings to top up my Thai account to 820,000 baht. That meant pulling out about 32,000 Canadian, leaving me with barely 4,000 in Canada as emergency backup. The visa renewal process took 3 trips to immigration, countless photocopies, a home visit to verify my address, and multiple requests for additional documentation. The immigration officer, a stern woman in her 40s, looked through my paperwork with an expression that suggested she'd seen 1,000 guys like me and wasn't impressed. She asked me pointed questions in Thai accented English. How was I supporting myself? Did I have work? Where did my money come from? Did I understand that the 800,000 baht had to stay in the account for 3 months after renewal? I answered everything correctly, showed my pension statements, my Canadian government documents, my bank books. Everything was technically in order. She stamped my passport for another year. No smile, no congratulations, just a bureaucratic function completed. I walked out of the immigration office with my renewed visa and felt no relief. Just the weight of knowing that I'd essentially locked up 32,000 Canadian dollars in a Thai bank account paying minimal interest, money I couldn't touch for months without jeopardizing my legal status. I had 4,000 Canadian in savings beyond what was frozen in Thailand, 61,000 baht of free access money, maybe 2 months of expenses if nothing went wrong. Everything went wrong. In October 2024, I started having chest pains, not constant, but frequent enough to scare me. Tightness, pressure, sometimes radiating down my left arm. I knew what that could mean. I'd watched my father die of a heart attack at 63. I went to the hospital, terrified. They ran an EKG, blood tests, a stress test. The cardiologist, a competent doctor who spoke excellent English, told me it wasn't a heart attack, but I had significant cardiac risk factors, high blood pressure I didn't know about, high cholesterol, stress markers through the roof. He prescribed medications, 2 different pills daily, both ongoing. He recommended regular checkups every 3 months. He strongly suggested I reduce stress, improve my diet, exercise regularly. The medications cost 4,500 baht monthly. The checkups would be 8,000 baht quarterly. And that was with insurance covering part of it. Point 1 filled the prescriptions and added 4,500 baht to my monthly expenses. New monthly burn rate, 45,000 baht minimum, 50,000 realistic. My pension, 66 to 68,000 baht. Margin, 16 to 18,000 baht, 640 to 720 Canadian dollars monthly for everything else. Food, entertainment, emergencies, anything unexpected. I lasted exactly 1 month before the first real emergency hit. November 2024. The hot water heater in my condo died, just stopped working completely. I reported it to the building management. They sent someone to look at it. Old unit, needed replacement. The building would handle it, but tenants were responsible for the unit cost. 15,000 baht. I didn't have 15,000 baht in free cash flow. I'd have to pull it from my Thai bank account, the one that had to maintain 800,000 for visa purposes. I tried to negotiate. Could I pay in installments? Could the building cover it and add it to my rent? The building manager was sympathetic but firm. Policy was policy. Pay for the replacement or live without hot water. I paid. My visa account dropped to 785,000 baht. I now had a visa problem. If immigration did a random check and saw my account had dipped below the requirement, I could face rejection on my next renewal. I'd have to rebuild that buffer with money I didn't have. That night, I sat in my condo, took a cold shower because the hot water wouldn't be fixed for 3 days, and did the math one final time. Savings accessible, 4,000 Canadian, about 96,000 baht. Savings locked for visa, 785,000 baht, about 33,000 Canadian, but 15,000 short of requirement. Monthly deficit between income and basic expenses. Tightening, but manageable, if nothing else went wrong. Likelihood of nothing going wrong. 0. I was 68 years old in exactly 1 more year. My health was declining. My social network had evaporated. My savings were nearly gone. I was living in a mouldy condo in a declining neighborhood, eating rice and eggs most meals, avoiding social situations because they cost money, watching every single baht like my life depended on it because it did. This wasn't retirement. This was poverty with better weather. I thought about my father in his last years. He'd worked his whole life, saved carefully, retired in Canada with a pension and government benefits. He'd lived modestly but comfortably. He'd seen his grandkids regularly. He'd had his community, his routines, his dignity. He'd died at home with family around him. If I died here, who would even know? The building management would eventually notice the smell. They'd clear out my stuff, keep the deposit for cleaning, and rent the unit to the next person within a week. Emily would get a call from the Canadian embassy. She'd have to arrange to ship my body back or have me cremated here. Either way, it would cost her money and emotional energy dealing with the death of a father. She barely knew because he'd chosen sunshine over family. I sat there in the dark because I was trying to save on electricity, and I started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears running down my face while I stared at my budget spreadsheet on my laptop screen. 7 years. I'd given up everything for 7 years of what I thought was freedom, and it had turned into a trap. The next morning, I video called Emily. It was evening in Toronto. She answered from her apartment, her boyfriend visible in the background cooking something. "Hey Dad, everything okay?" She looked concerned immediately. I probably looked terrible. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said automatically, then stopped. "Actually, no, I'm not fine." I told her everything. The money situation, the health issues, the visa stress, the loneliness, the fact that I was one major expense away from being completely broke in a country where I had no safety net. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Come home, Dad," she said quietly. "Just come home. I sold everything. I don't have a home to come back to. You can stay with me and Jason until you figure something out. We have a spare room. It's small, but it's yours if you need it." "Emily, I can't impose like that. You're not imposing. You're my father. And you're clearly not okay there." I wanted to argue, wanted to defend my choices, explain that I just needed a few more months to stabilize, that the dream was still salvageable. But looking at her face on the screen, the genuine concern there, the adult daughter offering to help her struggling father, I couldn't lie anymore. "Let me think about it," I said. "Don't think too long, Dad, please." That conversation was on a Tuesday. By Friday, I'd made the decision. I couldn't afford pride anymore. I couldn't afford to keep pretending this was working. I couldn't afford to stay. I started researching flights. One-way tickets to Toronto were running around 45,000 baht, about 1,800 Canadian. I had 96,000 baht accessible, enough for the ticket and some buffer for initial expenses back in Canada. I told my landlord I wouldn't be renewing when my lease ended in 2 months. She barely reacted. Units were turning over constantly now. I was just another expat who couldn't make it work. I sold my motorbike for 18,000 baht, about half what I paid for it, but I needed the cash. Sold my furniture and kitchen equipment to other expats for cheap, started packing my life back into 2 suitcases, same as when I'd arrived. I said goodbye to the few friends who remained. Roger was in Vietnam. Tom had moved to Cambodia. The new expats I barely knew. I had a final coffee with a British guy named Martin, who'd arrived just 2 years ago and was already seeing the writing on the wall. "It's not what they promised, is it?" he said. "No," I agreed. It's really not. I spent my last week doing a farewell tour of sorts. Went to the temples I'd loved. Walked through the old city. Sat at the Sunday market one last time. At a gao swa from my favourite place. Even though it now costs 95 baht instead of the 45 I paid in 2019, none of it felt romantic or bittersweet. It just felt like morning. December 8th, 2024. I took a taxi to the airport at 4 in the morning. The driver made small talk. Asked if I was going on holiday. I said yes, because it was easier than explaining. The airport was quiet. I checked in, went through security, sat at the gate watching planes take off into the dark sky. When they called my boarding group, I stood up, grabbed my carry-on, and walked down the jetway without looking back. 15 hours later, I landed in Toronto. It was minus 12 degrees Celsius. Snow everywhere. Grey skies. Emily picked me up at arrivals, hugged me tight, didn't ask any questions in the car. She drove me to her apartment in North York. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, nothing fancy. She and Jason had cleared out their spare room, put in an air mattress, hung some curtains. It's not much, she said apologetically. It's perfect, I told her, and meant it. That first week back, I barely left the apartment. Slept badly, jet-lagged and disoriented. Applied for Canadian social services. Reactivated my healthcare. Started looking for part-time work, even though I was 58, and the market wasn't exactly welcoming to older workers. My pension was still coming in, $2,800 monthly, but in Canada, that didn't go far. Groceries were shocking. A basic shopping trip cost $120. Transit was expensive. Everything cost more than I remembered. But I had healthcare I didn't have to pay for directly. I had my daughter checking on me. I had stability, even if it was humble. I started seeing a doctor for my blood pressure and cholesterol. Got the medications I needed through provincial coverage. Started walking to save on transit, which doubled as the exercise my cardiologist had recommended. Emily got me connected with the seniors community centre. I started playing cards there on Tuesday afternoons. Met other retirees, mostly immigrants from various countries, all of us stretching fixed incomes. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't living like a king. But the first also wasn't lying awake at 3 in the morning doing financial calculations and having panic attacks about visa renewals. 3 months after I got back, Emily asked me if I regretted Thailand. I thought about it carefully. I don't regret going, I said finally. I regret not planning better. I regret assuming the good times would last forever. I regret not keeping closer ties here so I had something to come back to. Do you think you'll ever go back? Maybe to visit someday, but not to live. That chapter's closed. Now it's January 2025. I'm 58 years old, living in my daughter's spare room, working part-time at a hardware store, making minimum wage to supplement my pension. I've got maybe 15,000 Canadian left in total savings after paying off debts and getting resettled. I'm not where I thought I'd be, but I'm also not broke and desperate in a foreign country anymore. I still follow the Thailand Expat forum sometimes. I see the same patterns playing out. New arrivals posting excited budget breakdowns, veterans posting warnings that get ignored, guys quietly disappearing from the forums when the money runs out. Last week, I saw a post from Martin, the British guy I'd had that final coffee with. He was asking for advice on cheap destinations in Southeast Asia because Chiang Mai had gotten too expensive. The responses were predictable. Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos. The same retirement dream, just moving to the next cheapest location until that one prices out too. It's a game of musical chairs where the music keeps speeding up and there are fewer chairs every round. I wanted to comment, to tell him what I've learned. That geographic arbitrage only works if you have enough capital, that you're not living on the margin. That retirement abroad on a modest fixed income is fundamentally unstable because you can't control the economic variables. That the dream they're selling on YouTube is real for some people. But those people have money, most of us don't. But I didn't comment. You can't save people from lessons they need to learn themselves. And honestly, maybe it'll work out for Martin. Maybe he's smarter with money than I was. Maybe the variables will align in his favour. I hope they do. But I also know that for every guy posting sunset photos and cost of living spreadsheets, there are dozens who quietly left, who ran out of money, who had health emergencies, who got hit by the 1,000 small cuts that eventually bleed you dry. We don't post about our failures. We don't make YouTube videos titled, "I had to move back to Canada because I couldn't afford Thailand anymore." We just disappear from the forums and the friend groups and the expat bars. We become the cautionary tales nobody wants to hear. So that's my story. The host asked me to share it because he thought it mattered. I agreed because maybe it'll help someone else do the math more honestly than I did. Maybe someone will read this and add a bigger buffer to their savings. Maybe someone will keep stronger ties to home. Maybe someone will choose a different path entirely. Or maybe they'll do exactly what I did, believe exactly what I believed, and learn exactly what I learned. Either way, the story needed to be told. The dream of retiring cheap in paradise is real. But it's not what the sales pitch promises. It's not stable. It's not guaranteed. And for thousands of us who bought that dream on modest means, it's ending the same way. With a one-way ticket home and a hard lesson learned about the difference between living well and barely surviving. Thailand didn't fail me. I failed to understand that dreams need financial foundations that can weather change. And when those foundations are built on assumptions about exchange rates and cost of living that are fundamentally unstable, eventually the whole thing comes down. I'm okay now, not thriving, but okay. I see my daughter regularly. I've got healthcare, I've got a community forming. I'm building something sustainable, even if it's not exotic. And on cold Toronto mornings when I'm scraping ice off car windshields at the hardware store parking lot, do I miss Thailand? Yeah, I miss the warmth. I miss the food. I miss the version of myself that felt young and free and possible. But I don't miss the math that didn't add up. I don't miss the stress. I don't miss being one emergency away from disaster. That's the truth they don't tell you in the retirement paradise videos. The math eventually matters more than the sunset. And for thousands of Western retirees right now, across Thailand and Southeast Asia, that math is running out. Some will adjust. Some have the resources to weather it. But many, like me, will quietly pack up and leave, taking our cautionary tales with us. The exodus is real. It's happening right now. And if you are thinking about joining the dream, please do better math than I did. Build bigger margins. Plan for change. Keep your bridges home intact, because paradise is wonderful until it's not. And when it's not, you need somewhere else to go. I learned that the hard way. You don't have to.